Okay, so we're back to the incoherence of the philosophers. Discussion 3, part 2, where Ghazali talks about the act and the nature of the act, and in the course of his argument that the philosophers or their philosophical system does not really, or is not compatible with the idea that the world is God's act, right? And remember he said that's because the act, to act, or action is bringing forth a thing from non-existence to existence by creating it, and that the pre-eternal already exists, as the philosopher believe that the world is pre-eternal. Therefore, Ghazali says they can't really think that it's an act because it doesn't come to exist, because what already exists can't be brought into existence, right? The world already always exists. It cannot be brought into existence. Yeah. And we had talked about before the argument from the philosopher, which Ghazali relays, which is actually Ibn Sina's argument, right? That the relation between God, the agent, and the world, right, is a relation to existence and not to non-existence, because nothing can relate to non-existence since non-existence isn't something, right? And from that, then to argue that the world's eternally being kept in existence, right? So the idea that it's being brought forth to existence, or it's being brought to exist eternally, doesn't mean it exists independently, right? They're going to clarify what we mean by God being the agent of the world is that God eternally keeps the world in existence, right? And so the whole issue is whether the act in that case has to be something which, in order to be an act, is brought to exist after not existing, or whether, right, it can be an act, considered an act even if it is eternally existing. And in the end, we saw the philosopher basically say, okay, if you don't like the word act, no problem. What we mean is the world is an effect, right? Ghazali conceded, right, that it can be an eternal cause and an eternal effect, or a cause and effect where the effect is eternally related to the cause, right? But just that effect would not be an act, because an act is not just any effect, it's a certain kind of effect, an effect which comes to be after not existing, right? The philosopher ended up saying, well, all we mean by, you can mean by it after that if you want to. All we mean by saying that the world is God's act is that it is an effect, it's eternally an effect of God, right? So it eternally exists, and it's eternally dependent on God for its existence, right? So that's where we left. What we're going to do today is look at some of Ibn Rushd's critique here. This is a case where Ibn Rushd actually disagrees with Ibn Sina, and you could say almost he agrees with Ghazali, but I think he's quite hesitant to do that. Rather, what he wants to do is to sort of save the reputation of the philosophers from the damage done by Ibn Sina's faulty argument. Right? The basic difference that Ibn Rushd has with Ibn Sina is, you could put it in this way to sum it up. Ibn Sina gives an argument and tries to explain the world as something which is eternally being, right? The world is eternally being because God is eternally giving existence to the world, right? Eternally keeping it in being. And Ibn Rushd's view is better described as that the world is eternally becoming, right? So you remember how Ghazali was saying, in order for it to be an act, it has to exist after not existing. And Ibn Rushd is basically saying, Ghazali is right here. The world, in order to be the act of God, it has to exist after not existing. And it is existing after not existing. But it's eternally existing after not existing. It's eternally becoming. So we'll kind of go through what he means by that. Yeah. Remember that Ibn Sina's argument was based on this dilemma. He said, right, the agent who brings to existence the act, right, is related to the act in as much as the act is existing or in as much as it's not existing. So God, right, as the maker of the world, relates to the world in as much as the world is existing or in as much as it's not existing, right? If we think about the idea that it might exist after having not existed, right? But again, non-existence is not a thing that you can relate to, right? Non-existence is not something which needs a cause, or which you can say God caused, it's nothing, right? Doesn't make sense. That means God wasn't the cause if he was causing nothing, right? Only existence can be related to in that way. So if you're going to say God's the cause of the world, it can only be the world as an existing thing, in as much as it exists, which is actually being caused by God, right? So, and therefore, that relation can be permanent and eternal, right? Now, the problem that Ghazali was saying was that the thing that already exists doesn't need a cause because it already exists. So it doesn't make sense to now to say that the thing exists, but it has a cause of its existence, because if it already exists, it doesn't need a cause, right? And that's there too. Ibn Rushd basically sees the problem in both. And this is reflecting an ancient philosophical problem, which is the one that Parmenides, like I said last time, discovered or hit upon or else concocted, however you want to look at it, right? That between being and non-being, there's no middle term, right? The idea was non-existence is not a thing, so we can't say that something is nothing or that nothing is a thing, right? We can't really consistently say that X does not exist, because it's as if we're saying X exists and it has this property of not existing. But what exists is just not, right?
Okay, what if something like has a potential of existing and not existing at the same time?
And well, that's the Aristotelian solution, which Ibn Rushd is trying to insert here, right? Aristotle came to the theory of potentiality in order to explain this problem, because the Parmenides problem made change impossible. Because for change to happen, something has to become what it's not, right? Something has to be what it's not, yeah? So what's not has to come to be, and what is has to become what's not, and that's a contradiction, right? So the idea of potentiality was to try to find that kind of middle ground between the two. If we say that something has the potential to exist, that entails that there is something that does exist, which is not that thing, but the thing that does exist could become that thing. So instead of saying that the new thing come to be completely out of non-existence, come to be from nothing, because nothing is not something which a thing can come to be from. Nothing is not some place that a thing can come out of, right? Nothing is just nothing. So for something to come to be, it can't come from nothing, it has to come from something. But it has to come from something else other than itself. And that other thing, right, has to have now this potentiality to become that new thing.
Just like fetuses.
I guess a fetus is a good image for it, right? Because a fetus gives the sense of all kinds of potential. We identify the fetus as something which could become, which has built into itself the kind of innate possibility, but not just like a loose possibility, but actually it's in there, right? Somehow the fully grown human is not existing yet, but it's existing not yet. See what I mean? We don't say that the grown human doesn't exist. We say it exists not yet. We don't say it doesn't exist, because that's pure nothingness, and nothing can come from nothing, right? So that's why Ibn Rushd is saying this. Ibn Sina's argument is faulty because it's based on this false dilemma of saying that the agent is connected to the act either in as much as the act exists or in as much as it does not exist. As if they're just basically two states, total non-existence or complete full actual existence, right? And in either case, now you have the problem. Change is impossible, right? And there's no need for a cause anyway. There's no issue there where the agent can relate, because nothing, non-existence is not something that the agent or a cause causes. And existence doesn't need a cause, it's already existing. Yeah? So the problem is that Ibn Sina left out this third thing. That is, as he puts it, the agent is connected with existence in a state of non-existence, or existence in potentiality, which is actually to say, it's connected with the potential of something. The potential of that thing is not complete non-existence, it's the thing, the existence of that thing in a state of non-existence. Sounds like a contradiction. Now, one way to look at it is you could say it sounds like a contradiction because it really is a contradiction. And because Parmenides was right, there's no kind of middle between being and non-being. It's either is or is not, right? But from the Parmenides, from the Parmenidean perspective, change is impossible. And really, in the history of philosophy, you can look at many schools of philosophy which can be classified as Parmenidean, in the sense that they try to explain change as something which is a mere appearance, right? And then they give the explanation of that appearance in terms of something which is not appearance, right? So, one example is the atomists, the Asherite atomists, yeah? Because their view was that, again, everything, even time, right, consists of indivisible parts, indivisible atomic parts, right? Now, if everything that exists in every moment is an indivisible atomic part, which is not only spatially but temporally indivisible, it's just one unit. There's no change in there, right? There's no sort of duration of time where the one thing is one way and then at a later time is a different way. Rather, there's just that bit, that fact, or that thing, and then it ceases to exist, and then there's another one. And then it ceases to exist, and then there's another one. See what I mean? So, this is like the digital explanation of change, right? How we can explain the movement of something on a screen. Well, it's actually because there's actually individual pixels, so they just turn on and off. Yeah? Yeah, so that gets around. That's to explain change in totally Parmenidean terms. It's either on or off. It's existing or not existing. Right? And there's no in between there.
Okay, what if, like, some things change, but still they, some intrinsic features remain?
Well, something is going to exist and not exist still, right? So let's say, like, that's the Aristotelian view of it. We have a substance, and it changes because it has a certain accident or attribute, and then it doesn't have that attribute. Like, for example, if you dye your hair blonde, right? You're the substance, you still exist, but your hair is now blonde and not black, right? But the blackness of your hair doesn't exist anymore, yeah? And so, right, there's still this issue of where did the blondness come from, and right, did it come to be from nothing, and did the blackness go into nothing, right? And we would say, well, that would be a contradiction, right? So we have to say that somehow the blondness is something which is still, it actually did exist as a potential of your hair. Yeah, so your hair is not actually blonde, but it's potentially blonde. We don't say that the blondness didn't exist, right? We say that it existed as a potential for your hair. So there's two kinds of existence, potential existence and actual existence. That's a way to get around saying it's not existing. Yeah? So we do have that. The distinction between substance and accident can help explain how, for example, now Reem could dye her hair blonde and it's still Reem. So something changed, but you remain the same. Yeah? It doesn't completely solve the Parmenidean problem though, right? Because we have to still explain from where did the color come and where did it go when it ceases to exist. How to explain that kind of thing. Anyway, Ibn Sina has this idea here. He's bringing his reading of Aristotle and his critique of Ibn Sina's argument that Ibn Sina fails to address this third option. It's based on a false dilemma, right? The agent's not connected with non-existence because nothing connects with nothing, again. And it's not connected with actual existence insofar as actual, because that doesn't need, right, any cause. It already is actual, right? It's only connected with existence, he also explains this as existence which is not linked up with non-existence. Yeah? This is the thing that exists, but it has some kind of potentiality. So for example, if we say, here's your hair, it is black, it could be blonde, but it's not blonde, right? So this is the Parmenidean problem. How can we make sense of you saying, your hair is not blonde? Because you're putting is and we're putting not. And that's a contradiction, right? Not can't be is, right? Then something that is not cannot be. We're saying your hair is not blonde. Well, the solution is to say your hair is potentially blonde, but not actually blonde. It's something about there, it exists, right? The sort of potential blondness is something that exists, okay? Not something that doesn't exist. And so what he means by existence, which is not linked up with non-existence, is full actual existence, as opposed to existence which is always having some potential. Yeah. I mean, basically, in the final analysis, the only thing that meets that is God, right? God is fully actual, right? Everything else is potential. But the problem is, one way to describe Ibn Rushd's problem with Ibn Sina's argument is Ibn Sina's argument would almost explain God's continually making another God, let's say, okay? Because he's sort of saying, well, the agent relates to the act in as much as the act fully exists, right? It's just being, right? Eternal being. Probably Ibn Sina didn't intend this, but this is what comes out. Okay? Because whatever has reached its perfection of existence needs neither causation nor cause. Yeah? Once you've dyed your hair blonde, the blondness is there. It doesn't need a cause anymore, right? It needed a cause to come to actuality, right? When it was there potentially. Yeah? So what's actually existing doesn't need a cause. That's but existence that is always linked up with non-existence only exists as long as the producer exists. And he talks about motion. Let's say a jog. Let's say you go for a jog. Now the jog, or the jogging, has an action, has a motion, right? That's something which is kind of always in motion. It's always sort of something not yet. It's always in process, or progress. Let's say it's always a work in progress. Some things are of that nature, that they're always a work in progress. If the jogger stops jogging, then the jog doesn't exist anymore, right? If the runner stops running, then the run is gone, because it's purely an action, it's purely a process. Yeah? If a guy builds a house, once he stops building, the house is there, because the house isn't purely a process. He's actually produced a separate existing substance, as the Aristotelians say, right? Which is not just itself a process. It's not just itself a movement or motion. Yeah? So, existence that is always linked up with non-existence only exists as long as the producer exists. Yeah? Okay, so we have that. And that's what he says. The only way to escape this difficulty, that's that Parmenidean difficulty that's arising here, right, is to assume that the existence of the world has been and always will be linked together with non-existence, as is the case with movement, which is always in need of a mover. In other words, the world as a whole is more like a jog than it is like a house. Right? Remember the example before that Ibn Sina gave was that of the house. He said, it's not like you theologians think that, God comes, like the builder comes, he makes the house, he makes the building, and then the builder leaves, the building is still there and exists on its own without the builder. No. The universe, the cosmos, exists. In its existence, it continually and eternally depends on God to conserve it in existence. Right?
So is it like this view that you and God and the universe are one? You're all one?
No, but it seems to threaten to be that, so everybody wants to take care to avoid that. You'll see how Ibn Rushd seems that Ibn Sina is like, his argument can sort of collapse into that if we're not careful. Yeah. Again, remember there's 4 causes? Yeah, the efficient cause, the formal cause, the material cause, and the final cause. The efficient cause, which Ibn Rushd and Ibn Sina are calling as the agent, and which also Al-Ghazali considers as the agent. Remember Al-Ghazali says, but it also has to be an efficient cause that acts by will and choice, right? But in any case, the efficient cause for them was, or the agent, is that which brings about, that which causes the existence of something distinct from itself. Yeah? The builder comes and builds the house is a distinct thing from itself. Right? I suppose, yeah, if I blow my nose and there's a booger, the booger is different from me, right? I'm the efficient cause of the booger, yeah?
But then if you think about you and the booger have the same cells.
Hmm? That's okay, we can separate, that can be separate. We'll ask about, how things are separate, yeah? The booger can exist distinct from me. If I cease to exist, the booger still be there. The booger, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. This has to do with what makes the thing a distinct thing, right, from other things around it, right? And that's a question that Aristotelian philosophy also deals with, because indeed, if it could mean, we could think that everything is just one mass of stuff, right? But that kind of takes away. We still have to. We'd ask ourselves, but that's weird because we think there are different things. Here's a desk, here's a computer, here's a person, here's another person. So there seem to be individual things in the world. Now, if I say that everything's one because it's all just one mass of stuff, yeah, then I have to explain the mere appearance of individual things. Why do we think that there are individual things? Why does it appear to be the case? Why do we think and talk about it as if that's the case, right? Now, the key about in Aristotelian philosophy and in the Greek philosophy, right, is that they take that much more seriously, I think, than maybe we do now, right? Or, I don't know that maybe that philosophers do now. Philosophers still take that seriously in many ways, but, if we think about physical sciences and physics, the whole issue about physics is to try to identify those sort of basic particles that everything's made out of, right? And if you were not to take the way we actually think about and talk about things seriously as a real issue, right, then you could easily just conclude that everything is just stuff, everything like the atomists did actually in the ancient Greek atoms. Everything is atoms, right? But then they had the same problem. Like if everything is atoms, now we're explaining that everything is atoms, and the chair is a collision of atoms, and the tiger is a collision of atoms, right? Well, how does this collision of atoms get to be a chair? And how does that get to be a tiger? And how do they get to be separate things? Separate clumps of atoms, right? What makes them different things? Well, we could say that that's all illusion, right? That's just, we think there are different things, but everything is just a bunch of stuff. But then we have to ask, well, what causes us to have that illusion? And who are we having the illusion? That means we're separate things too, right? Secondly, there's us, there's the illusion, there's the stuff. Still separate things. It's you know what I mean? It's a lot more complicated. There's good reasons to take seriously the fact that we think of things separately, right? And the Aristotelian philosophy considers the separate thing as a substance. So the individual thing, what makes one thing an individual, is not that it's made out of some stuff, that if one thing is different from another, it has to be made out of different stuff, right? I mean, this coffee cup, it can be made out of paper, and another coffee cup can be made out of paper, but there are two of them, right? Or if I have a cup made of ceramic and a bowl made of ceramic, this is a cup and that's a bowl, even though they're both ceramic, right? And it's because of other things, because of these causes we're talking about, right? The formal cause, the form is different. Maybe the matter is the same, but the form is different. The final cause, the purpose is different, right? And they even may have the same agent, the same guy may have made both, right? Now, we're going to get back to the issue of it's still the same issue about the oneness, right? The formal cause is not something distinct from the thing. So if I say the certain sort of blueprint or shape that this, ceramic has been put in is the formal cause of its being a bowl. It's the formal cause of the bowl, right? But the form of the bowl is not something distinct from the bowl itself. It's actually a dimension of the bowl. Right? Likewise, the purpose of the bowl, the final cause, is not really something distinct from the bowl, right? As a substance. The person who shaped it into a bowl, right? The potter, yeah? Now he's a distinct thing. He's the efficient cause of the bowl. He's the other thing that brought this into existence by shaping that ceramic into that shape, yeah? So if we talk about the formal cause, it's the same as the bowl itself. It's not distinct from the bowl, right? If we talk about the material cause, what the bowl is made out of, the stuff, that's also not distinct from the bowl. That's the same as the bowl. If we talk about the final cause, right? Also, let's leave that one, because that one's a little bit, but let's just leave those two, yeah? Now, if we consider the agent of the world to be the stuff that the world's made out of, or the form of the world, we would have that, right? The world and the God are the same, right? But if we consider the agent of the world to be an efficient cause of the world as well, then that agent is distinct from the world, and they're not one, right? Yeah. What makes different things different for? Well, that's a different. We'll probably go. We spend a lot of time talking about individuation and how there are different distinct things and what substances in Aristotelian philosophy. But if we're going back here, Ibn Rushd is basically telling us now, Ibn Sina's argument is based on this false dilemma, which leads to this philosophical paradox, right? Basically, because the thing, in as much as it actually exists, doesn't need a cause, and if when it doesn't exist, it can't have a cause, because nothing is not something that can have a cause, right? So if we're going to talk about the world being caused and being related to a cause, we can't talk about the world or anything else, right? Being in terms of its actual existing or in terms of its not existing. We have to go back to Aristotle's theory or idea here of its existing in potentiality. So we have to understand the world, and if we're going to apply that problem now to the world, the only way we can escape that paradox is to understand the existence of the world as a whole as something which has always been and always will be linked together with non-existence. As, or in other words, a work in progress, right? Like I would say, like I'm running, or the example they used before, stirring the water with finger. You're stirring around and around, right? It's a motion, it's a movement, right? The nature of a movement, it's not a thing that's ever all there, right? It's always not yet some and leaving, right? It's always sort of an in-between. That's the nature of motion, as opposed to an object, right? The key here in Ibn Rushd is you got to understand that the world is a process. It's not an object, yeah? So you can think of a house, right? But the builder comes in now, what you can say, and Ibn Sina can say, oh, the house needs God, depends on God continually for its existence. But when you're thinking about the house as a fully actual thing, it's in contradiction, because the house already exists. It doesn't need a cause, right? It already exists. Something that needs a cause to exist can't be something that completely exists, right? And it can't be something that completely does not exist, because the non-existence is not something that's related to it all. It has to be something that's sort of always in a halfway stage. It's somewhat existing, somewhat not, which is the case when I'm running. Huh?
It's always potential.
It's always potential. Now think about that. I'm running. It's an action and a movement. And in a movement and in change, there's always like something which is coming, which is not yet, and something which is no more. I'm always in an in-between being and non-being. That's becoming. Becoming is the state between being and non-being. Yeah? Because being is not something, non-being, non-existence is not something that can come to be. It's not something at all. It's not like there are things out there in non-existence and then they pop. Here I am! And before I was there in the non-existing room, but now I'm in the existing room. That is a contradiction, because that means you were there in the non-existing room, right? Non-existence is nothing. Yeah? Likewise, if I am existing, I'm not coming, here I am. No, because you're already here all the time. Right? No change would be possible. So there has to be something in between. That's becoming. And in fact, that's what we see all around us all the time. It's change and change and change. Things are becoming something that they weren't before, right? And so, we can divide in thought, being and non-being, but in an actual concrete existence, right, in what he calls the sublunary realm, right? That's to say, the earth and everything below the heavens. It's change all the time. It's process. And the world as a whole is a process. So now we can see, the world as a whole is a process. It's always in need, it's a motion, it's a movement, so it's always in need of a mover. So God is the agent, eternally, of the world, not in the sense as Ibn Sina's argument seems to entail or imply that the world is eternally being. No, God is the agent which is keeping the world eternally becoming.
Okay, I'm kind of like, I feel like it's sort of implying that God isn't really creating a thing. It's like it's always halfway in between. It's implies that God is incapable of creating something that is whole.
Out of nothing.
It's like
Oh.
it always has to be patchwork, sort of.
Yeah, well, that's still yet to come because apparently there can be, there's this other issue about whether there is something that is whole. What kind of a thing can be whole, right? What kind of a thing would that be? Yeah. Now God is, right? So unless we're going to say that the world is also another God, it would have to be something different. Definitely around us we see, right? So Ibn Rushd is like Aristotle, very empirical. Around us we see things that are changed. Around us we experience things that are not whole, that are patchwork, that it's always a work in progress, right? Does that mean God cannot create something which is whole? Well, what is that kind of thing? That will come later, but what that would be. Yeah. Basically, it's the preview is that it's the souls of the heavens. What do we mean by the souls of the heavens? There's a reason for them to say these things, right? Even though they sound on the front of it strange. Okay, so we kind of skipped through last. We remember this is what the philosopher had to say about the example of the building and so forth. Okay, so then when we get to Ibn Rushd again, this is a little bit complicated, right? This has to do with the building example, right? So what he says here. The cause is only connected with the fully actual existence of the effect, if its being in effect is its very essence, right? So there are some things, if we ask what is it, the fact that it's an effect of something else is the very essence of it, right? An example is like a shadow. And this is also kind of like one of the examples that Ghazali had presented as examples of the way in which the philosopher believed the world is the effect of God. Like a man casts a shadow, you know what I mean? Light comes from the sun, a man casts a shadow. The shadow is an effect of the man, and it's just a necessary effect. He doesn't choose. He doesn't say, I will make a shadow. No, the shadow just comes off of him. There's no choice involved. That's what he's using that example, right? Which the philosopher actually often use sometimes, right? To describe how the world depends on God, right? Like the shadow depends on someone. But the shadow is just a necessary effect. Anyway, another thing about a shadow is that if we ask what a shadow is, being an effect of something which casts it is actually essential to what it is, right? My shadow is essentially something which is an effect of me, yeah? On the other hand, like the house, right, at least on the surface, yeah?